When 28-year-old Vincent Brennan failed to return from a solo research trip in Utah's treacherous canyonlands, his family reported him missing. For 3 months, the official search yielded nothing, and the case was reclassified as a recovery. He was presumed to be another victim of the unforgiving desert. Then, 2 climbers scaling a sheer, undocumented cliff face found a hidden crack in the rock. What they discovered inside was a scene of chilling desperation. And the journal in his lap would reveal a truth far more terrifying than a simple accident, a story of a man trapped just out of sight, listening to his own rescue fail as he slowly ran out of light, water, and time. Before we go any further into one of the most haunting discoveries in Utah's history, we want to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from, and if you've ever been lost, even for a few hours, in the wilderness. What did it feel like? And if you're the kind of person who can't stop thinking about mysteries like this one, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Now, let's go back to where this story really begins. October 18th, 2019. Vincent Brennan was not the kind of person who disappeared. At 28 years old, he was a graduate student at the University of Denver, working toward his master's degree in environmental science with a focus on desert ecosystems. Those who knew him described him as meticulous, cautious, and deeply respectful of the wilderness. He kept detailed journals of every hike he took, noting weather patterns, geological formations, and wildlife sightings with the precision of someone who understood that nature demands attention. Vince wasn't reckless. In the 5 years before his disappearance, he had completed over 50 solo hiking trips across Colorado, Utah, and Arizona. He always filed his route plans with park rangers, he always carried emergency supplies, and he always, without exception, returned on schedule. He was lean and tall, just over 6 feet, with the kind of build that came from years of scrambling up canyon walls and hiking through high desert. He had a quiet confidence about him, the kind that didn't need to announce itself. Around his neck, he always wore a vintage brass compass on a leather cord, a gift from his grandfather, who had been a surveyor in the Southwest during the 1960s. That compass would later be one of the few ways they identified his remains. In mid-October of 2019, Vince told his younger sister Bridget that he was planning a 5-day research trip to the Maze District of Canyonlands National Park. The Maze is one of the most remote and unforgiving sections of the park, a sprawling labyrinth of slot canyons, vertical walls, and stone formations that all look identical from ground level. There are no paved roads, no cell service, no water sources. It's the kind of place where, if something goes wrong, you are entirely on your own. Bridget was used to her brother's trips by this point, but she always felt a small knot of worry when he left. This time, though, Vince seemed particularly excited. He told her he'd been reading old geological surveys from the 1980s and had found references to undocumented alcove formations in the area he planned to visit. Cave systems, essentially, that had never been officially explored or recorded. For someone like Vince, that was irresistible. The night before he left, he sent Bridget a detailed itinerary. His plan was straightforward. Drive to the Hans Flat Ranger Station on October 18th, register his route, and then spend 5 days hiking a loop through the maze. He would return to his vehicle no later than October 23rd and call her that evening. He included GPS coordinates for each planned campsite, a list of his supplies, and a note at the bottom that said, "If I'm not back by the 24th, send the cavalry." It was meant to be a joke. Vince always came back. Among the supplies he listed were items you'd expect: water purification tablets, a first aid kit, freeze-dried meals, a satellite messenger device. But there were also some unusual additions: 12 emergency candles, 3 battery-powered camping lanterns, extra matches, spare batteries. When Bridget saw the list, she texted him, "Planning to open a candle shop out there?" His response came a few minutes later. "Might do some night exploration in alcoves. Want to make sure I have enough light. Don't worry, I'm not taking stupid risks." That was the last message she received from him. On the morning of October 18th, 2019, Vince drove his silver Honda CR-V out of Denver and headed southwest toward Utah. It was a clear, crisp autumn day, the kind of weather that makes the desert feel almost forgiving. He stopped for gas in Grand Junction, Colorado, then continued on Highway 70 toward the town of Green River, Utah. Security footage from a rest stop showed him filling a water jug at a drinking fountain, stretching his legs, and checking his phone one last time before the long drive into the backcountry. By mid-afternoon, he had reached the small town of Hanksville, the last outpost of civilization before entering Canyonlands. He stopped at a gas station called the Hite Marina, a place that serves as the final supply point for anyone heading into the maze. The station's security cameras captured him walking inside, browsing the aisles, and approaching the counter with an armful of items. The clerk that day was a woman named Darlene Mosley, a local who had worked at the Hite Marina for over a decade. She later told investigators that Vince was polite and quiet, the way most solo hikers are when they're mentally preparing for days of solitude. But one thing stuck with her. He bought an unusually large quantity of candles. He came up to the counter with 6 packs of emergency candles, Darlene recalled in her statement. Each pack had 4 candles, so that's 24 total. I asked him if he was stocking up for winter, and he just smiled and said he liked to be prepared. Then he grabbed 3 more packs of batteries off the rack. I remember thinking it was a lot, but people do strange things out there, so I didn't question it. Along with the candles and batteries, Vince purchased a large bag of trail mix, a bottle of electrolyte solution, and a laminated map of Canyonlands. He paid in cash, thanked Darlene, and walked back out to his vehicle. The timestamp on the receipt read 3:47 p.m. From there, he drove the final stretch to the Hans Flat Ranger Station, a small, isolated building that serves as the entry point for the Maze District. He arrived just before closing time and walked inside to register his route. The ranger on duty was a man named Carl Peterson, a veteran of the Park Service who had been working in Canyonlands for 15 years. Carl later described Vince as focused but not distressed. He seemed excited, honestly, Carl said. He showed me his planned route on the map, asked a few questions about trail conditions, and mentioned that he wanted to explore some side canyons if he had time. I asked him if he had enough water, and he said he was carrying 3 gallons, plus purification tablets. He seemed like he knew what he was doing. Vince signed the route registry, left a photocopy of his itinerary with the station, and drove off toward the trailhead. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the canyon walls in shades of orange and red. It was 5:30 p.m. when his vehicle disappeared down the dirt road into the wilderness. That was the last confirmed sighting of Vincent Brennan alive. For the next 4 days, his family heard nothing. That wasn't unusual. Cell service doesn't exist in the maze, and Vince had told them he'd only use his satellite messenger in case of an emergency. Bridget went about her life in Denver, checking her phone occasionally, but not worried. Her brother was experienced. He'd done this dozens of times before. But on October 23rd, the day he was supposed to return, there was no call. Bridget texted him that evening. No response. She tried calling his cell phone, knowing it was probably pointless, and it went straight to voicemail. By 10 p.m., the knot of worry in her stomach had become something sharper. She waited until the morning of October 24th, telling herself that maybe he'd just decided to stay an extra day. Maybe his satellite device wasn't working. Maybe he was fine and she was overreacting. But when noon came and there was still no word, she picked up the phone and called the San Juan County Sheriff's Office. The dispatcher took her information calmly, asked a series of questions about Vince's planned route and experience level, and then transferred her to the park's search and rescue coordinator. Within 2 hours, a welfare check was initiated. Rangers drove out to the trailhead where Vince had parked his vehicle, and they found it. The silver Honda CR-V was exactly where it was supposed to be, parked neatly in the small dirt lot at the end of the access road. The doors were locked, the windows were intact. There were no signs of struggle, no indication that anything was wrong. When the Rangers unlocked the vehicle using Vince's spare key, which his parents provided, they found his backup cell phone sitting in the cup holder. His wallet, containing his driver's license and credit cards, was in the glove compartment. On the back seat were several sealed bags of extra food supplies, untouched. Everything looked normal, except that Vince wasn't there. The ranger who conducted the initial search of the vehicle noticed something else. On the passenger seat was Vince's journal, the one he used to document his trips. It was open to the first page of his itinerary for this hike, dated October 18th. The entry read, "Arrived at Trailhead, 5:45 p.m. Weather clear, temperature dropping. Plan to set up camp near Chimney Rock tomorrow and explore alcove formations in the area. Excited to see what's out there. If I find anything significant, I'll document coordinates for future research." Beneath that, in smaller letters, he had written, "Reminder, bring extra light sources when exploring enclosed spaces." It was the last thing he had written in that journal. The pages that followed were blank. By the evening of October 24th, the Park Service had activated a formal search and rescue operation. Vincent Brennan was officially missing in one of the most hostile and remote wilderness areas in the continental United States, and the clock was ticking. The Maze District of Canyonlands covers over 30 square miles of fractured sandstone, vertical cliffs, and slot canyons that twist through the landscape like the tunnels of some immense underground labyrinth. There are no maintained trails, no water, no roads beyond the rough dirt tracks that bring you to the edge of the wilderness. Once you step into the maze, you are walking into a place that looks the same in every direction, where landmarks vanish behind walls of rock, and the sun overhead offers no clue to your location. It is a place where people disappear. When Search and Rescue Coordinator Captain Rita Castellano received the call about Vincent Brennan, she knew immediately that this was going to be difficult. She had overseen dozens of search operations in Canyonlands over the years, and the maze was always the worst. The terrain made helicopter searches nearly useless. Ground teams could cover only a few miles per day. And if the missing person had strayed from their planned route, the search area expanded exponentially. But Captain Castellano also knew that Vince wasn't a typical case. He was experienced. He had filed a detailed route. He carried emergency equipment, including a satellite messenger with GPS tracking. If he was in trouble, he should have been able to call for help. The fact that he hadn't sent a distress signal was, in some ways, more concerning than if he had. The search operation began in earnest on the morning of October 25th. Captain Castellano assembled a team of 40 volunteers, including park rangers, local search and rescue personnel, and experienced hikers who knew the area. 3 helicopters were brought in from Salt Lake City, equipped with thermal imaging cameras designed to detect body heat even in the vast expanse of the desert. The plan was straightforward. Follow Vince's registered route, check each of his planned campsites, and expand outward from there if necessary. Ground teams would split into groups, each covering a different section of his itinerary. Meanwhile, the helicopters would conduct aerial sweeps, focusing on the areas where Vince was most likely to have traveled. On paper, it sounded efficient. In practice, the maze had other ideas. The first full day of searching yielded nothing. Ground teams hiked to the coordinates of Vince's first planned campsite near a formation called Chimney Rock and found no trace of him. No tent, no fire ring, no footprints. They expanded their search radius, calling his name into the canyons and listening for a response. The only sound that came back was the wind. Thermal imaging from the helicopters was equally frustrating. The problem with searching the desert in October is that the sun heats the sandstone during the day, and at night, the rocks radiate that heat back into the air. On a thermal camera, every boulder, every cliff face, every patch of exposed stone glows with a heat signature. Distinguishing a human body from the landscape is nearly impossible. One of the helicopter pilots later described the experience. "It's like trying to find a candle in a room full of light bulbs. Everything is the same temperature. You can't see anything that stands out." On the second day, the search dogs arrived. 3 Belgian Malinois, trained specifically for wilderness tracking, were brought in from a specialized unit in Colorado. The handlers took the dogs to Vince's vehicle, let them sniff items from inside, and then brought them to the trailhead. The dogs immediately picked up a scent. They moved with purpose, noses to the ground, leading the handlers along the trail that Vince would have taken into the maze. For the first 2 miles, the trail was clear. The dogs followed it without hesitation. But then, near a cluster of red sandstone boulders, they stopped. The handlers described it as an abrupt loss of scent. One moment, the dogs were tracking confidently. The next, they were circling in confusion, sniffing the air, unable to find the trail again. It was as if Vince had simply vanished at that spot. Captain Castellano and her team examined the area carefully. The ground was hard-packed stone, the kind that doesn't hold footprints well. There were no obvious signs of a struggle, no blood, no torn fabric, just a cluster of boulders and, beyond them, 100 different directions Vince could have gone. The dogs were taken to several other locations along the planned route, but they couldn't reacquire the scent. After 2 full days of effort, they were withdrawn from the search. By the 3rd day, media outlets in Utah had picked up the story. Local news stations ran segments about the missing hiker, showing his photograph and asking anyone with information to come forward. Vince's face appeared on the screen, clean-shaven, smiling slightly, wearing the brass compass around his neck. The caption beneath the image read, "Missing, Vincent Brennan, 28, experienced hiker, last seen October 18th. Bridget arrived in Utah on the evening of October 27th, 4 days into the search. She drove straight to the Hans Flat Ranger Station, where Captain Castellano briefed her on the operation. Bridget later described the meeting as both professional and heartbreaking. "Captain Castellano was honest with me," Bridget said in a later interview. "She told me they were doing everything they could, but the maze was enormous and Vince hadn't activated his emergency beacon. She said that was actually a good sign, that it might mean he wasn't injured, that maybe his device had malfunctioned and he was just lost, but I could see in her eyes that she was worried." Over the next week, Bridget joined the search efforts, hiking with volunteer teams through the canyons, calling her brother's name until her voice went hoarse. She distributed flyers at nearby towns, Moab, Hanksville, Green River, anywhere someone might have seen Vince before he entered the park. She posted on social media, reaching out to hiking communities and forums, asking for any information. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of people shared the posts, dozens offered to join the search, but none of it brought them any closer to finding Vince. On October 29th, something happened that briefly reignited hope. A ground team was searching an area about 3 miles from Vince's planned route when one of the volunteers noticed something hanging from a tall rock formation. It was suspended about 15 feet off the ground, caught on a narrow ledge. When they climbed up to retrieve it, they realized what it was. It was Vince's backpack. The discovery sent a jolt of energy through the search operation. Finally, a tangible piece of evidence. The backpack was immediately brought to Captain Castellano, who opened it carefully, documenting each item inside. The contents were strange. Inside the backpack were many of the things you would expect: a half-full water bottle, several sealed pouches of freeze-dried food, a first aid kit, a multi-tool knife, a lightweight tarp, and a small cooking stove. But there were also notable absences. The satellite messenger device, which Vince had listed on his itinerary, was not in the backpack. Neither were any light sources. No flashlight, no headlamp, no candles, no lanterns. All of the lighting equipment Vince had brought, equipment that Darlene at the gas station had specifically remembered him purchasing in bulk, was missing. Captain Castellano stood in the ranger station, staring at the empty backpack, trying to make sense of it. "Why would he remove all his light sources and leave everything else?" she said to one of her deputies. "And how did the backpack end up 15 feet off the ground?" There were theories, of course. Perhaps Vince had been climbing and set the backpack on the ledge temporarily, intending to retrieve it later. Perhaps he had taken the lights because he was planning to explore a cave or a slot canyon and wanted to travel light. But none of the theories explained why he hadn't come back for the rest of his supplies. The area where the backpack was found became the new focal point of the search. Teams combed every inch of the surrounding terrain, looking for footprints, clothing, any sign that Vince had been there. Helicopters flew low over the cliffs, searching for a body at the base of the formation in case he had fallen. They found nothing. On November 1st, after 2 full weeks of searching, Captain Castellano made the decision to scale back operations. More than 50 square miles had been covered. Every accessible area along Vince's route had been searched multiple times. Thermal imaging, search dogs, ground teams, and aerial sweeps had all come up empty. The chances of finding Vince alive at this point were, realistically, almost zero. Even if he had survived an initial injury, 2 weeks without adequate water in the desert would be fatal. At a press conference held that afternoon, Captain Castellano addressed the media with visible exhaustion. "We have conducted an extensive search of the Maze District," she said. "Our teams have worked tirelessly, and I want to thank every volunteer, every ranger, and every pilot who contributed to this effort. At this time, we are transitioning to a limited search protocol. We will continue periodic aerial sweeps and remain alert for any new information, but the reality is that the area is vast, and despite our best efforts, we have not been able to locate Mr. Brennan." She paused, looking directly at the camera. "If anyone has any information, no matter how small, please contact the Park Service immediately. Vincent Brennan is still out there, and his family deserves answers." Bridget sat in the front row of that press conference, her face pale, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. When the reporters began asking questions, she stood up and spoke. "My brother is experienced," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "He's not a novice. He wouldn't just wander off. Something happened to him. Something went wrong. And I need you to keep looking. Please." The footage of Bridget's plea was broadcast on local news that evening. It was shared thousands of times online. But as the days passed and the search remained suspended, the story began to fade from public attention. Vincent Brennan became another name in the long list of people who had disappeared into America's wilderness and never come back. November arrived, bringing colder temperatures and the first dusting of snow to the higher elevations of Canyonlands. The chances of survival, already slim, dropped to 0. The Park Service officially reclassified Vince's case from search and rescue to recovery. The search was not abandoned, but it was no longer active. Rangers would keep an eye out during their patrols. Hikers would be asked to report anything unusual. But there were no more organized search efforts. The investigation shifted to Detective Owen Thatcher of the San Juan County Sheriff's Office, a seasoned investigator with 2 decades of experience in wilderness cases. Thatcher reviewed all the evidence: the vehicle, the backpack, the journal entry, the last known sightings. He interviewed everyone who had interacted with Vince before he disappeared: Darlene at the gas station, Carl at the ranger station, Vince's friends and family. But every lead ended in the same place: nowhere. Thatcher's working theory was that Vince had suffered some kind of accident, likely a fall, in a location that was difficult to access or see. The maze was full of hidden ravines, narrow slot canyons, and vertical drops concealed by overhangs. If Vince had fallen into one of those natural traps, it could be years before anyone stumbled across his remains. The missing light sources remained a puzzle. Thatcher speculated that Vince might have been trying to signal for help and had used the candles and lanterns to create a visible light source at night. It was possible, though it didn't explain why none of the search helicopters had spotted anything. As for the backpack hanging on the rock formation, Thatcher believed Vince had placed it there intentionally, perhaps to mark a location while he explored nearby. But why he never returned to retrieve it was a question that had no answer. By mid-November, the case file sat on Thatcher's desk, marked Open Inactive. He checked it periodically, hoping for new information, but none came. And then, on November 10th, something strange happened. A wildlife photographer named Oliver Hatch contacted the Park Service with an unusual piece of evidence. Hatch had been in Canyonlands on October 19th, the day after Vince entered the park, taking telephoto shots of the canyon formations for a nature magazine. He hadn't thought much about it at the time, but after seeing the news coverage of the missing hiker, he decided to review his photos more carefully. In one of the images, taken in the late afternoon, Hatch had captured a wide view of a canyon wall. The photos showed the layered sandstone cliffs, the deep shadows cast by the setting sun, and the vast emptiness of the desert. But when Hatch zoomed in on the image during post-processing, he noticed something. High up on the cliff face, partially obscured by an overhang, was a small, dark opening. And inside that opening, barely visible even at maximum zoom, was a tiny flicker of light. It looked like a flame. Hatch sent the photo to Detective Thatcher, along with GPS coordinates embedded in the image file, showing exactly where he had been standing when he took the shot. Thatcher immediately forwarded it to Captain Castellano and the park search team. The location was approximately 2.5 miles from Vince's planned route, in a section of the maze that had been considered too dangerous and unlikely to search thoroughly. The cliff face in the photograph was nearly vertical, with no obvious trail or access point. Reaching that opening would require technical climbing equipment, harnesses, ropes, and anchors, none of which Vince had been carrying. But the flicker of light was undeniable. Captain Castellano assembled a small team of experienced climbers to investigate. However, the weather had turned. Snow was now falling intermittently, and the rock was becoming slick and dangerous. After a brief attempt to reach the location, the team was forced to turn back. The cliff face was simply too hazardous to climb in those conditions. The decision was made to wait until spring, when the weather improved and a proper technical rescue could be mounted. Bridget was informed of the discovery. She stared at the photograph for a long time, zooming in on the tiny flicker of light, trying to convince herself it meant her brother was alive. "That's where he is," she told Detective Thatcher. "I know it. We have to get up there." But the Park Service was firm. Sending climbers up that wall in winter conditions would be reckless and potentially fatal. If Vince was in that cave, and the light in the photograph suggested he had been there at one point, he had been there for over 3 weeks by now. No one could survive that long without water. Bridget refused to accept it. She returned to Utah in December and hiked out to the area near the cliff face, staring up at the wall, trying to see the opening from ground level. It was invisible. The overhang concealed it completely. She hired a private wilderness consultant, a retired search and rescue expert, to review the case. He looked at all the evidence and gave her the same conclusion everyone else had. Vince had likely died within the first 2 weeks, and his body was probably in a location that would be found eventually, maybe in months, maybe in years. Bridget couldn't let it go. She created a website dedicated to her brother's case, posted updates on social media, and reached out to hiking communities asking for anyone with experience in technical climbing to volunteer. But the responses were sympathetic and unhelpful. The maze was too remote, the cliff too dangerous, the outcome too certain. On December 15, 2019, Vince's family held a memorial service in Denver. Friends, classmates, and colleagues gathered to share memories of a man who loved the wilderness and had spent his life studying it. His parents stood at the front of the room, hollow-eyed and exhausted, thanking everyone for coming. Bridget sat in the front row, staring at a photograph of her brother on the altar, taken during one of his hikes in Colorado. In the picture, he was smiling, the brass compass hanging around his neck, the desert stretching out behind him. At the end of the service, Bridget stood and spoke. "We haven't found him yet," she said quietly, "but we will. I don't care how long it takes. He's out there, and he deserves to come home." The room was silent. 3 weeks later, winter settled fully over Canyonlands. The maze was covered in snow, the trails impassable, the cliffs sheathed in ice. The park was closed to all but the most experienced winter hikers, and even they were warned to stay away from the more dangerous sections. The cave in the cliff remained inaccessible, and Vincent Brennan remained missing. But that was about to change. January 24, 2020, dawned cold and clear over Canyonlands National Park. The overnight snowfall had dusted the red sandstone cliffs with white, creating a stark and beautiful contrast against the pale blue sky. The temperature hovered just above freezing, and the air was still, the kind of stillness that makes every sound carry for miles. Felix Ortega and Cara Donnelly were not thinking about missing hikers that morning. They were thinking about the climb. Felix and Cara were both 31 years old, experienced alpinists from Portland, Oregon, who had spent the past 5 years tackling some of the most difficult rock faces in the American West. They had climbed in Yosemite, the Tetons, and the Black Canyon of the Gunnison. They were preparing for an expedition to Patagonia later that year and had come to Canyonlands specifically to train on the vertical sandstone walls. The section they had chosen was an unnamed cliff in the eastern part of the maze, far from any established trails. It was a wall they had scouted the previous day, a sheer face of limestone and sandstone that rose nearly 400 feet from the canyon floor. According to their research, no one had successfully climbed it before. That made it perfect. They began their ascent just after sunrise, moving slowly and methodically, placing protection anchors as they climbed, testing each handhold and foothold before committing their weight. The rock was cold and slightly damp from the melting snow, which made it more challenging, but both Felix and Kara thrived on that kind of challenge. By mid-morning, they were about 300 feet up, working their way across a section of wall that overhung slightly, creating a concave curve in the cliff face. Felix was leading, hammering in a cam anchor, when he noticed something strange. Just above him, partially hidden beneath the overhang, was a crack in the rock. Not a climbing crack, the kind you wedge your fingers into, but a horizontal fissure, about 3 feet wide and perhaps 18 inches tall. It looked like an opening. "Kara," he called down, "there's some kind of cave up here." Kara climbed up to his position, clipping into the anchor he had just set. She leaned back in her harness, looking at the opening. "You think it goes anywhere?" she asked. "Only one way to find out." They debated for a moment whether it was worth the detour. They were here to climb, not to explore caves. But curiosity won out. Felix pulled himself up to the opening and shone his headlamp inside. The passage was narrow, sloping slightly upward, but it looked navigable. He squeezed through, his shoulders scraping the limestone walls, and found himself in a larger space. The ceiling opened up, and the narrow crack became a tunnel about 15 feet long. And that's when he smelled it. The scent was thick and unmistakable. Burned wax, heavy and cloying, mixed with something organic and unpleasant. The smell of decay. "There's something in here," Felix called back to Kara. His voice sounded strange in the enclosed space, muffled and flat. Kara followed him into the tunnel, turning on her own headlamp. The beams of light played across the stone walls as they moved forward, crouching slightly to avoid hitting their heads. The tunnel opened into a chamber, and that's when they saw it. The chamber was roughly circular, about 20 feet in diameter and 8 feet high at its center. The floor was relatively flat, covered in a fine layer of dust and sand. But that's not what caught their attention. The floor was covered in candles, not scattered, not haphazard, arranged. There were dozens of them, maybe 60 or 80, all burned down to stubs. They were positioned in rough circles and lines across the floor, their wax melted and pooled in hardened white and yellow puddles. Some were small, the kind you'd use for emergencies. Others were thicker, pillar-style camping candles. All of them had been lit and burned until there was almost nothing left. 3 camping lanterns sat at equal intervals around the chamber, their glass chimneys blackened with soot, their fuel reservoirs dry. "What the hell?" Kara whispered. Felix swept his headlamp across the room, and the beam landed on the back wall. That's when they saw the body. It was seated against the stone, legs crossed, head tilted forward. The remains were skeletal, the clothing partially intact. The person had been dead for months. Around the body, more candles had been arranged in a careful semicircle, as if creating some kind of protective barrier. Kara inhaled sharply and stepped back. Felix stood frozen, his mind trying to process what he was seeing. On the wall behind the body, carved into the limestone with what must have been immense effort, were tally marks, 47 of them, arranged in groups of 5. And in the skeleton's lap, held between the bones of the fingers, was a small leather-bound journal. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was their breathing, quick and shallow, echoing slightly in the enclosed space. "We need to call this in," Kara finally said, her voice shaking. They backed out of the chamber, moving carefully through the tunnel and out onto the cliff face. Felix pulled his satellite phone from his pack and, with trembling hands, dialed 911. The dispatcher asked him to describe the location, and Felix did his best, reading off the GPS coordinates from his device. He explained that they were climbers, that they had found a cave, and that there was a body inside. A body surrounded by dozens of burned candles. The dispatcher's voice remained calm and professional, but Felix could hear the shift in tone. This was not a routine call. "Can you remain at the location?" the dispatcher asked. "Yes," Felix said, "we're not going anywhere." It took nearly 4 hours for the response team to arrive. Captain Rita Castellano, who had led the search for Vincent Brennan 3 months earlier, was among the first to reach the site. When she saw the location, high up on the cliff face, accessible only through technical climbing, her stomach sank. She had always suspected Vince was somewhere in the maze, hidden in a place that was difficult to reach. But this was worse than she had imagined. A technical rescue team was assembled, including experienced climbers from the Park Service and a forensic investigator from the San Juan County Sheriff's Office. They geared up and began the ascent, following the route Felix and Kara had pioneered. By late afternoon, they reached the opening in the cliff. Captain Castellano was the second person to enter the chamber, following the forensic investigator. When her flashlight swept across the floor and she saw the candles, the lanterns, and the body, she felt a wave of cold dread wash over her. This was Vincent Brennan. She knew it before any formal identification. The forensic investigator moved carefully through the chamber, photographing everything before touching anything. The candles, the lanterns, the tally marks on the wall, the body in its seated position. Every detail was documented. When he finally approached the remains, he examined the clothing and the items nearby. Around the skeleton's neck was a brass compass on a leather cord, tarnished but intact. That alone was enough for a preliminary identification, but they would confirm it with dental records later. The investigator carefully removed the journal from the skeleton's lap, placing it in an evidence bag. The leather cover was stained and warped, but the journal appeared to be mostly intact. "How did he get up here?" Captain Castellano asked, looking around the chamber. "There's no climbing equipment, no ropes, nothing." The investigator didn't have an answer. He was focused on documenting the scene, but the question hung in the air. After several hours of work, the team carefully removed Vincent Brennan's remains from the cave and began the slow process of transporting them down the cliff face. By the time they reached the ground, it was nearly dark. Felix and Kara, who had waited at the base of the cliff, watched the operation in silence. When it was over, Captain Castellano approached them and thanked them for making the call. "You did the right thing," she said. "His family has been waiting a long time for answers." That night, back at the ranger station, Captain Castellano sat at her desk and stared at the evidence bags in front of her. The journal, the compass, photographs of the cave showing the candles arranged in their eerie patterns. She opened the case file for Vincent Brennan, the file she had thought would remain unsolved forever, and began writing her report. But even as she wrote, she knew the biggest questions were still unanswered. How had Vince gotten into that cave? Why were there so many candles? What did the 47 tally marks mean? And most importantly, what was written in that journal? The answers, she suspected, were going to be more disturbing than anyone expected. The journal was sent to a forensic document specialist in Salt Lake City, where it was carefully dried, examined, and photographed page by page. The process took 3 days. Some of the pages were damaged by moisture and time, the ink smudged and faded, but most of it was still legible. On January 28, 2020, Detective Owen Thatcher received the transcription. He sat alone in his office, the door closed, and began to read. What he found inside those pages was a day-by-day account of Vincent Brennan's final 2 weeks of life. It was written in Vince's precise, methodical handwriting, the same handwriting that filled his previous journals documenting past hikes. But as the entries progressed, the tone shifted. What began as scientific observation slowly devolved into something more desperate, more raw. This is what Vincent Brennan wrote. October 18, 2019. 6 p.m. Arrived at Trailhead just before sunset. Weather is perfect. Clear skies, temp around 55 degrees F and dropping. Set up camp about half a mile from the vehicle. Tomorrow, I'll start exploring the alcove formations I read about in the old geological surveys. Excited to see if I can find something undocumented. October 19, 9:30 a.m. Broke camp early, following my planned route toward Chimney Rock area. About 2 miles in, I noticed a vertical wall with some interesting features. There's a formation at the base that looks like it might conceal a passage. Going to check it out. If it's significant, I'll mark the coordinates. October 19, 2019, 2:15 p.m. This is incredible. I found it. Hidden behind a cluster of boulders at the base of the cliff, there's a crack in the rock. It's narrow, maybe 3 feet wide, but it leads upward. At first, I thought it was just a shallow fissure, but when I shone my light inside, I could see it goes deeper. It's like a natural chimney, a vertical tunnel carved through the cliff face by water erosion over thousands of years. I decided to climb it. The technique is called chimneying, pressing your back against one wall and your feet against the other, then inching upward. It's exhausting, but the passage is stable. I climbed about 30 feet and found myself in a cave chamber, a real cave, completely hidden inside the cliff. The entrance from below is invisible unless you know exactly where to look. The chamber is about 20 feet across, with smooth walls and a relatively flat floor. And here's the most amazing part. There are pictographs on the back wall. Ancient markings, definitely ancestral Puebloan, maybe 2,000 years old or more. Geometric patterns, handprints, and what look like humanoid figures with elaborate headdresses. This is significant. This could be an undocumented site. I'm going to spend some time here documenting it, taking photos, making sketches. This is exactly the kind of discovery I hoped to make. October 19, 2019, 4 p.m. Something happened. I was getting ready to climb back down the chimney passage to retrieve my backpack and some more equipment from below. I had left most of my gear at the base of the cliff, only bringing up my emergency supplies, water, candles, lanterns, so I could move faster through the narrow passage. But when I started descending, about 10 feet down, the rock gave way. A section of the wall, a piece I had used as a foothold on the way up, just crumbled. Sandstone does that sometimes, especially the older, more weathered layers. I lost my footing and fell. It wasn't a long fall, maybe 8 or 10 feet, but I landed badly on a rock outcrop inside the chimney. I heard something snap in my leg, and the pain was immediate and overwhelming. I'm back in the cave chamber now. I managed to crawl back up, using my arms and my one good leg, but it took everything I had. My left leg is broken, badly broken. I can see the bone pressing against the skin, and it's swelling rapidly. I can't put any weight on it. I tried to splint it using a piece of my tarp and some cord, but I'm not sure it's helping. The pain is constant, like a fire running from my knee to my ankle. I need to stay calm. I need to think this through. October 19, 2019, evening, no timestamp. Okay, here's the situation. I'm trapped in a cave chamber about 30 feet above the canyon floor, accessible only through a narrow vertical passage that I cannot descend with a broken leg. The passage requires precise footwork and body positioning. With only one functional leg, it's impossible. My satellite messenger device is in my backpack, which I left at the base of the cliff. My phone has no signal, obviously, and wouldn't help anyway. I have 3 liters of water up here with me, some food bars, the candles and lanterns I brought for exploring, and my first aid kit. The good news, people know where I am. Well, they know my general route. I filed my itinerary with the ranger station. My sister knows I'm supposed to be back by October 23rd. That's 4 days from now. When I don't show up, she'll call for help. They'll search for me. The bad news, I'm off my planned route by about 2.5 miles, and this cave is completely hidden. You can't see the entrance from the ground unless you're standing right below it, and even then, it's concealed by the rock formation. From above, the overhang blocks it completely. Helicopters won't be able to see me. But I have to believe they'll find me. I have to believe that. I'm going to conserve my water, ration my food, and wait. Tonight, I'll light candles at the entrance to the chimney passage. Maybe someone will see the light. Maybe it will reflect off the canyon walls and catch someone's attention. I'm going to be okay. I just need to stay calm and wait for rescue. October 20, 2019. Didn't sleep much last night. The pain in my leg is constant. I've been taking ibuprofen for my first aid kit, but it's barely helping. The swelling is worse today. The skin around the break is turning dark purple and blue. I spent the night keeping candles lit near the entrance to the passage. I rotated them every few hours, so there was always light. I thought maybe someone hiking nearby would see the glow, but no one came. I'm trying to stay positive. It's only day 2. The search won't start until I miss my check-in date, which is still 3 days away. Once it starts, they'll find me. They have to. In the meantime, I'm documenting everything. It helps keep my mind occupied. The pictographs on the wall are fascinating. I've been sketching them in detail. There's a central figure that appears to be holding a torch or a staff, surrounded by smaller figures. It reminds me of ceremonial imagery I've seen in other ancestral Puebloan sites. It's strange, being trapped in here with these ancient markings. People stood in this exact spot 2,000 years ago, painting these images by firelight. And now I'm here, lighting candles, waiting. History repeating itself in the strangest way. October 21, 2019. Water is going faster than I thought it would. It's warm in here during the day. The sun heats the rocks and the cave traps the heat. I'm sweating constantly, which means I'm losing more water than I anticipated. I've started rationing more strictly, small sips every few hours. I have maybe 2 liters left. I heard a helicopter today, I'm sure of it. The sound echoed through the canyon, that deep, rhythmic thudding. I scrambled to the entrance of the passage, lit every candle I had, all 12 emergency candles at once. I held them up, tried to angle them so the light would be visible from outside. The helicopter passed directly overhead, but it didn't stop. It didn't even slow down. They didn't see me. I don't know if the overhang blocked the view, or if the daylight made the candles invisible, or if they just weren't looking in this direction. But they didn't see me. That was hard. Hearing rescue so close and knowing they missed me. But they'll come back. They'll keep searching. I just need to hold on. October 22nd, 2019. I've been thinking about the candles a lot. It sounds stupid, but they've become important to me. When I light them, it feels like I'm doing something. Like I'm not just sitting here waiting to die. The light is active. It's alive. It pushes back the darkness, even if only for a few feet. I know that's irrational. Candles aren't going to save me, but they help me think. When the cave is dark, my mind starts to spiral. I think about the pain in my leg, about how much water I have left, about what happens if no one finds me. But when the candles are lit, I can focus. I can look at the pictographs, sketch in my journal, make plans. The light gives me structure. I'm burning through them quickly, though. I only have a few emergency candles left. But I still have the 3 lanterns, and they have full fuel tanks. I'll switch to those when the candles run out. I heard another helicopter this afternoon. This time I tried something different. I positioned all 3 lanterns at the entrance to the chimney passage, lit them, and let them burn continuously for an hour. I hoped the sustained light would be more visible than individual candles. But again, the helicopter didn't stop. I'm starting to wonder if they're even searching this area. Maybe they think I'm somewhere else. Maybe they've already given up. No, that's the pain talking. That's the fear. I need to stay rational. October 23rd, 2019. Today was supposed to be the day I returned home. Bridget is probably calling right now, realizing I haven't checked in. She'll contact the authorities. The search will officially begin. It's been 4 days since the accident. I'm running out of water. I have maybe half a liter left.
I'm rationing it down to tiny sips, but I know it won't last another day. My leg is in bad shape. The infection is definitely setting in. The skin around the break is hot to the touch, and there's a smell coming from it. A sweet, rotten smell. I've been taking the antibiotics from my first aid kit, but I don't think they're strong enough. I'm feverish. My temperature is up, and I'm sweating even though I'm trying to conserve water. That's a bad sign. The candles are gone. I burned the last one this morning. But I still have the lanterns. I keep them lit as much as I can. The light helps. It really does. I've been staring at the pictographs for hours. There's something hypnotic about them. The central figure holding the torch, the way the smaller figures seem to dance around it. I wonder what ritual they were depicting. Fire? Light? Survival? Maybe that's what this is. A ritual. I light the lanterns. I mark time on the wall. I wait. Just like the people who painted these images thousands of years ago. We're all just waiting for something, aren't we? October 24, 2019. No more water. I finished the last few drops this morning. My mouth is dry. My tongue feels thick and swollen. I tried licking the condensation off the cave walls, but there's barely anything there. Just a faint dampness that disappears as soon as I touch it. I know what happens now. I've studied dehydration. I've read the case studies. I have maybe 2 or 3 days left, depending on how much my body can hold on. The fever is worse. My vision keeps blurring. The pain in my leg is almost unbearable, but at the same time, it feels distant, like it's happening to someone else. I'm still lighting the lanterns. I don't know why. Rescue isn't coming.
If they haven't found me by now, they won't. But I light them anyway. It's the only thing that makes sense anymore. I started carving marks on the wall, counting the days. Or maybe counting the lanterns I've burned. I'm not sure anymore. The numbers feel important, but I can't remember why. The pictographs are moving. I know that's not possible. I know it's the fever, the dehydration, my brain shutting down. But I swear I can see them shifting in the lantern light. The figures dancing. The torchbearer stepping forward. Maybe they're welcoming me. Maybe this is what this cave has always been. A place where people come to meet the light. October 25th, 2019. I'm not afraid anymore. That's the strangest part. For the first few days, I was terrified. Terrified of the pain, of dying alone, of never being found. But now, it's different. The fear is gone. There's only the light. I keep the lanterns burning constantly now. All 3 of them, positioned around me in a circle. The chamber glows. The pictographs shimmer on the walls. It's beautiful. I wonder if Bridget will find this journal. I hope she does. I want her to know I wasn't scared at the end. I want her to know I found something here. Not just the cave, not just the pictographs, but something else. Something I can't quite put into words. Peace, maybe, or understanding. The light knows the way. The torchbearer showed me. October 27, 2019. The lanterns are almost out of fuel. One of them sputtered and died this morning. I have 2 left. I've been marking the wall, but I lost count. 40? 50? The numbers don't mean anything anymore. My body is shutting down. I can feel it. My heartbeat is irregular. My breathing is shallow. I'm cold, even though the cave is warm. But the light is still here. As long as the light is here, I'm still here. I've arranged the burned candle stubs around me in a circle. It feels right, protective. The pictographs are watching me. The torchbearer is waiting. I think I'm ready. November 1, 2019. I became the light. That was the final entry, the last words Vincent Brennan ever wrote.
Detective Thatcher sat in his office, staring at the pages, his hands shaking slightly. He had read hundreds of case files over his career, but nothing had affected him like this. The slow deterioration of a rational mind, the desperation, and finally, the strange, feverish acceptance. Vince had survived for at least 14 days in that cave, possibly longer. He had held on far past the point where most people would have given up. And in the end, surrounded by the light he had created, he had found some kind of peace. But the journal also answered the questions that had haunted the investigation. How Vince had gotten into the cave, why he had so many light sources, what the tally marks meant, and most hauntingly, it revealed that he had been alive, conscious, and waiting for rescue, even as search teams passed overhead, never seeing the tiny flicker of light from the hidden cave. Detective Thatcher closed the file and made a phone call. It was time to tell the family what they had found. On January 30th, 2020, Bridget Brennan sat in a conference room at the San Juan County Sheriff's Office, along with her parents, listening as Detective Thatcher explained what had been found in the cave. He was careful, compassionate, and as gentle as he could be. But there was no way to soften the reality of what her brother had endured. When he finished, Bridget asked to read the journal entries herself. Thatcher hesitated, warning her that it might be difficult, but she insisted. She needed to hear her brother's words. She read them in silence, tears streaming down her face. When she reached the final entry, "I became the light," she closed the journal carefully and sat for a long moment without speaking. "He wasn't scared," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. At the end, he wasn't scared. Her mother reached over and took her hand. Her father sat with his head bowed, shoulders shaking. Detective Thatcher gave them all the time they needed. Later that day, the medical examiner released the official cause of death: severe dehydration and systemic infection resulting from an untreated compound fracture. Time of death was estimated to be between November 1st and November 3rd, 2019, approximately 14 to 16 days after the initial accident. The manner of death was ruled accidental. But for the investigators, the case revealed something more. The cave where Vince died was not a random geological feature. It was part of a hidden system of passages and chambers that had remained undiscovered for centuries, accessible only through the narrow chimney that Vince had climbed. When a full survey team was sent to document the site, they made another discovery. In a small side chamber, concealed behind a rock formation, they found remnants of old camping equipment. A moldy sleeping bag, a rusted metal tin, and inside that tin, more emergency candles, old and brittle with age. There was also graffiti scratched into the wall, faded but still legible: J.R. 1987. A local historian was consulted, and after some research, the initials were matched to Jonas Richter, an amateur cave explorer who had gone missing in Canyonlands in the summer of 1987. His disappearance had never been solved. His body had never been found. Until now. The realization sent a chill through everyone involved in the investigation. Vincent Brennan had unknowingly stumbled into the final resting place of another lost soul. And in a strange twist of fate, he had used Jonas Richter's emergency supplies, candles that had been sitting in that cave for over 30 years, to sustain his own desperate attempt to signal for rescue. Two men, separated by decades, had died in the same hidden chamber, both trying to keep the light alive just a little longer. The Park Service sealed the cave entrance permanently, installing a metal grate and posting warning signs. A brass plaque was placed at the base of the cliff, reading, "In memory of Vincent Brennan, 1991-2019, and Jonas Richter, 1959-1987. The desert keeps its secrets." In the months that followed, Bridget established the Vincent Brennan Memorial Fund, dedicated to improving search and rescue protocols in national parks. She advocated for better GPS tracking requirements for solo hikers, more comprehensive search grids, and increased funding for technical rescue operations. Her efforts led to policy changes in Canyonlands and several other parks. New regulations were put in place requiring all solo hikers to carry activated satellite messengers with GPS tracking, and search protocols were updated to include low-probability off-route areas earlier in the search process. Vince's story was covered by national media, and his journal entries, selected excerpts approved by his family, were published in an Outside magazine article titled The Last Light. The article sparked conversations about wilderness safety, the limits of rescue operations, and the psychological toll of isolation. But for Bridget, the publicity was never the point. She visited the sealed cave once, standing at the base of the cliff, looking up at the spot where her brother had spent his final days. "He found something beautiful," she said in an interview later. "That's what his journal shows. He was in pain, he was dying, but he found beauty in those pictographs, in the light he created. That's who he was. Even at the end, he was still discovering." The cave remains sealed. The pictographs, those ancient images that Vince sketched and photographed, have been documented and added to archaeological records. They are believed to be part of the Barrier Canyon style, created by ancestral Puebloan people between 2,000 and 4,000 years ago. The central figure, the torchbearer that Vince wrote about in his final entries, has become something of a symbol. Archaeologists believe it represents a shaman or spiritual guide, leading people through darkness. For Vince, in his feverish, dying state, it had become something more, a companion, a witness. And in a way, that torchbearer had been with him until the very end. The Maze District of Canyonlands National Park is still one of the most remote and dangerous wilderness areas in the United States. Every year, experienced hikers venture into its canyons, drawn by the beauty, the solitude, and the challenge. And every year, a few of them don't come back. Between 2010 and 2020, more than 30 people went missing in Canyonlands. Most were eventually found.
Some were not. The wilderness doesn't forgive mistakes. It doesn't offer second chances. A single misstep, a crumbling rock, a wrong turn, any of these can be the difference between coming home and becoming another name in a case file. Vincent Brennan understood that. He respected the desert. He prepared carefully. He followed protocols. But in the end, none of it was enough. The cave that fascinated him, that drew him in with its hidden passages and ancient art, became his tomb. But his story didn't end in that cave. It lives on in the policy changes that protect other hikers, in the awareness his case brought to wilderness safety, and in the words he left behind. Words written by candlelight in the final hours of his life, documenting not just his death, but his refusal to surrender to darkness. "I became the light." Those 4 words are carved on his headstone in Denver, alongside the dates of his birth and death. Bridget chose them. She said they captured her brother better than any eulogy could. Because in the end, Vincent Brennan did exactly what he had always done. He observed, he documented, he searched for beauty in the world around him, and when he couldn't find light, he created it, even if no one else could see it. If Vincent Brennan's story moved you, if it reminded you of the power and danger of the wilderness, we want to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Tell us, what would you do if you were trapped like Vince? Could you survive 2 weeks in darkness, holding on to hope that rescue would come? And if stories like this one, the mysteries that haunt us, the disappearances that finally find resolution, keep you coming back, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Every week, we bring you the cases that never made sense, the searches that ended in silence, and the truths that eventually come to light. Because the wilderness holds its secrets, but sometimes, if you listen closely enough, it tells you what happened. Thank you for watching Last Seen Stories. We'll see you in the next one.